Hi, this is Joel with the Taproot Therapy Collective podcast, Discover, Heal, Grow. And I'm here today with MJ Denis from Austin, Texas. And she's a provider that I trained with when I did emotional transformation therapy. She was incredibly helpful. She did a lot of my consultations, and we've kind of kept in touch. And she was just a really welcoming presence in the emotional transformation community to kind of welcome me in. I don't want to make it sound like it's a cult, but it is a lot to learn, and there was like so much that the technical bit and a lot of things about how you're going to grow into these things that you are always so warm and open and encouraging. So I really appreciate that because it's informed my practice a lot now. And I'll let you talk about kind of your practice, and we can have a conversation about ETT today and some of the stuff that on its face sounds kind of wild, but really is a scientific pursuit there.
Hi, Joel. I thank you for saying that. I'm glad I did make you feel warm and welcome. ETT, emotional transformation therapy, was not something I saw coming, but once I learned how to do it, it transformed my practice. And so I am an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, and an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist, right outside of Austin, Texas, in San Marcos. I started my counseling journey. I became a counselor in 2012 and became certified as a sex therapist through ASECT. And then after working at Crossroads Counseling Associates, we were affiliated with the Affair Recovery Center. And so working with infidelity experts, I leaned into a lot of training in betrayal trauma recovery. So I'm an APSATS certified partner trauma specialist as well. I learned about being a sex therapist. I learned about out of control sexual behaviors. Through SASH, I learned about sex addiction. I really leaned into training outside of grad school. But I recognized as I was working with clients, talk therapy is wonderful and it's effective, but it only gets so far. And so I decided to learn some brain-based interventions. I knew that I needed something more to help my clients than talk therapy. So I learned how to do EMDR and eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I thought EMDR was amazing, and it was really, really helpful and a good fit for some of my clients. Some of my clients, it was not a good fit. And so I was looking for something better.
Did you notice a through line between that? Because I'd like to look for the kind of Venn diagram of our journey. It sounded like we kind of were on similar trajectories. And when I got trained in EMDR, I thought it was just kind of a purple hat therapy that maybe would distract people or something, and it didn't do much for me. And then I started noticing like, whoa, like for 20-30% of people, there is a very strong neurological effect. But within 2 weeks, I was like, this does not work for the reason that they say it works. Like, I don't see that bilateral like synchronization thing. I mean, I think Francine Shapiro's guesses were great for 1984. I just think that we've got 30 more years of neuroscience. And I started looking for like, who is this helping? Who's this not helping? And I noticed that dissociative patients would respond really strongly to it, but it wasn't always the best for them because there tended to be layers where you would treat this thing that they thought was the problem, and then something else would come up and they would decompensate, and then you'd treat that. And it's like, okay, well, we're going through a well. So, you take one thing off the top, the next thing floats up. Eventually you're going to run out of stuff, but the process was pretty messy. So they tended to like it. Whereas I was like, you don't realize that what it's really going to be like to stir up 8 months of work in a session, And I don't know. I'm just wondering if you saw through lines of who it helped, who it didn't, what you liked about it, what you didn't. Because I'm EMDR trained. I haven't done it for probably 7 years. Brain spotting almost entirely replaced it, and ETT expanded that. So I was just curious if you made observations at that time.
I like you. I don't do EMDR anymore. I don't need to. ETT is just more effective and efficient, and I can treat a wider variety of conditions that impact people. My lens, Joel, is through safety. Being in this field of sex therapy in conjunction with betrayal trauma and infidelity. I often think through a safety lens. People come in so traumatized and grief stricken. And when they've experienced betrayal, the world doesn't feel safe. So when I'm doing therapy and using ETT, I like it more than EMDR because my brain says I can keep my clients safe. Meaning, when they were doing EMDR, it was almost like being on a train for some people. Memories would flash by people. And even though we can do some containment, I felt like I couldn't really control or keep them safe and focused during the process.
That was my experience. That brain spotting became this surgical tool to go all the way through one thing. Whereas when we were concentrating on an emotion and doing the things, they're like, now I'm on heroin, now I'm in the flop house, now I'm hiding out in Vegas, now I'm doing this, now I'm doing this, now, and they're confused. But it really is like, you're on this train of memory, everything related to that. Which didn't work.
Pathway, the web, right? It goes from one memory to another. Yep.
I think that's a riskier way to get there. I mean, it did work for the people who got treatment that way. A lot of those patients have now come back, and brain spotting and ETT, I think, took them deeper into things that we thought we were done with.
Yes. I still can offer EMDR, but once my clients experience ETT, they find it a better fit for them. And so people don't ask for EMDR. I've had one lady in the last 8 years ask me to do EMDR, so I met her where she was. With ETT, what ended up happening, I worked with a gentleman, Rick Reynolds, who he does all the trainings. He tries to stay really cutting edge, and he met Dr. Stephen Vasquez. And Dr. Vasquez had moved from Dallas to Austin and was actually practicing around the corner from our practice. And Rick did some training with him. And Rick and I, at that point, we were on either side of a wall. Our offices were next to each other. And so as we would walk our clients to the waiting room, he'd say, MJ, I have a client with depression and I did ETT and the depression is gone. And I remember just kind of patting him on the shoulder and saying, sure, Rick. And I was very skeptical. How can that be? And then we would walk out and go to the waiting room and he'd say, MJ, I have a client with anxiety and I did ETT and the anxiety is gone. Sure, Rick. And then story after story, Joel, of working with somebody using ETT to help their OCD, intrusive and ruminating thoughts stop and their compulsive behaviors remit. We talked about using ETT for ADHD presentations, for grief, for trauma. And the list was endless. And at some point, I was so skeptical, but I trust Rick, and he kept having these stories. So one day, my 8 a.m. client canceled and his 8 a.m. client canceled, and he invited me to do an ETT session with him. And I jumped on that. Yes, heck yes. At that time, Joel, he said, MJ, think of something, when you think of it, that you have a lot of distress or emotions about. And at that time, something had happened with one of my sons. And as I was sitting in Rick's office, he stood in front of me with some sticks that had color on the end. And he said, MJ, I want you to talk about your boy and talk about this experience, this thing that's happening in your lives. And look at the sticks with the color at the end. And I'm going to move them. And I want you to follow them with your eyes. And Joel, I thought he had lost his mind. I thought, what is he talking about? But I did. I talked about the experience. I cried. I was very, very distressed. And as I followed with my eyes and I followed the sticks, I could feel my emotions changing. He switched out the different colors a few times. I could feel my stress getting lighter. The tears stopped, and he moved me over and sat me.
The physical changes are always almost what people notice before the emotional change. It blooms into the.
Well, right. The tears stopped. So my sadness was lightening. And I had all kinds of fear and sadness and mama bear guilt and shame. And how do I protect my child? And how did these things happen? Were going through my mind, distressing thoughts. When he sat me in front of the ETT chart, the spectral chart, it, as you know, it has colors, strips of colors on it. And I remember Rick saying, if the colors change in any way, that means you're dissociating, and tell me right away. Again, Joel, Rick, the colors, this is a poster. How are the colors going to change? But okay. So as he instructed me where to look, talk about my son and this experience, the color expanded. I was looking at green, the color expanded, and he said, you're dissociating, close your eyes. And then he had me do some thinking and answer a sensory question. I opened my eyes and the color was back. And I didn't know what had happened, but that was weird. And then look at this color, talk about it again. The color disappeared. He said, you're dissociating, close your eyes. He got me back online, right? Got me connected to myself. And then after looking at a few colors, he suddenly said, okay, MJ, that's it. You're done. And what do you mean I'm done? And he literally, Joel, he went like this, have a nice day. And I went back to my office and it had been like 23 minutes. And when I thought about what was happening with my son, I mean, neutral. My distress was reduced. My body, my nervous system felt calm. And even though I had no idea what had just happened, I knew I had to get trained in this because he was onto something. He experienced something profound.
Yeah, I won't talk to people about the science until they sit down. I'm like, look, if you're going to sit on the couch for 5 minutes, I can show you something that you can't explain. But if I start talking about the science, you're just going to think I'm crazy. And then once they try it, they're like, wait, but how could that? And I'm like, well, because the optic nerve doesn't go directly to occipital. It wraps around the brainstem and you feel 90% of what you're seeing before you actually see it and blah, blah, you know. But if you start trying to front load that, you're just going to kind of scare everybody away. But there is an effect where people are like, they kind of need to blink and test it. And then they're like, I can't explain this. I can't talk my way out of this. It's replicating consistently,
Yes. I have that same experience where I'll try to give someone a scientific explanation because we humans, as you know, we like to understand. We want to understand. So one way I explain ETT, I'll say emotional transformation therapy is a form of psychotherapy that integrates the use of light and color. So while a person talks about a topic, there's a verbalization component, and they feel their emotions, there's the emotional component, while using visual eye stimulation, those are the wavelengths of light, how a person feels emotionally and physically changes. That's my short blurb.
Well, so let's back up just a little bit. And Dr. Vasquez, who is going to be on here later, hopefully that'll be the episode that follows this one. Most therapy modalities come about when there's somebody I'd like to go a little bit back in his story and in yours, like, they come about where somebody says like, I'm kind of tired of talking about the ego and the id. What if there's 5 parts of self? And then the patient says, oh yeah, I have an inner critic or pusher. And then they write down, well, you should engage, and it comes from that kind of clinical experimentation. But, Vasquez is a very educated guy. I mean, I think he's got like 4 degrees or something, but he basically read research and it didn't come about that way. It was a neurological thing where he read all these ways the brain worked and was like, well, if it does this, would this do something to emotion, based on other people's data? And, in his book, I think he says he built 6 devices or 8 devices or something. And then basically 4 of them worked. And he was willing to get outside of the box. He had the creativity and the openness to say, well, what if, I kind of like color and light. What if that does something? But he also had, and not be kind of afraid of that as a scary space, but he also had the scientific, credulousness to say, these don't work. these aren't doing anything. When you shine light through skin, it tends to not work unless it's red, and then it just is affecting mitochondria and muscles. It's not really affecting the brain as much, and so the 4 devices that he built based on those theoretical maps are really effective, and they've become the kind of modules that ETT is. But you had told me, I think at one of the trainings, that you'd seen him present a lot of the time, and that you were kind of outraged about the absurdity of it. That you, before you actually came into ETT, you're having the same kind of response that I was having of like, this is crazy. This is all the chromatotherapies in the 70s were a scam. This is just, yeah,
Yeah, I met another counselor, Dr. Annie Curlin. She practices in California. And I met Annie at a conference, and she said, MJ, you really should check out this ETT, emotional transformation therapy. I do this. It uses light and color, and it's amazing. And it transforms how people feel very quickly. And it is replicable, and it's effective. And I blew her off. When I heard light and color, I thought, nope.
I'm a serious person. I do serious therapy. Yeah.
Nope, not doing that. And then I ran into her again a couple of years later, and she said, "Did you get trained in ETT yet?" And no, I did not. And she said, she pushed me again, really consider this. Well, it wasn't until Rick learned ETT, and I had that experience at Crossroads. And I had even seen Dr. Vasquez do a demo at one of those conferences along the way when I was training. It was a SASH conference, and I was training in how to be a sex therapist and help people with sexual issues. And Dr. Vasquez presented, and he did a light box demonstration where he had somebody with distress, who was just another therapist in the room, sit in front of the device, and he had them talk about their distress. They were in touch with their emotions. He showed light and color into their eyes, colors that matched their emotions, and the person changed. And I remember thinking, this is the setup. They staged this. I absolutely couldn't believe that transformation could happen that quickly. So I did
people see things on the light box sometimes. I mean, they'll experience, you're just looking at a color or screen and a flicker rate, but people, I didn't get that in the training, but a lot of other people did, and you all kind of prepared us for it. I think someone had seen, who was processing grief of a dog, like a dog paw come out of the screen and stuff.
The first time my oldest son did ETT using the light device, when he came home, I said, how was it? I didn't ask him the content. I just was curious how the ETT went for him. And he said, Mom, I saw the Death Star turning. So he saw a spaceship turning into the light box. I don't know what he was processing, but his brain did create an image.
Yeah.
But it helped him. And he was probably 19 years old at the time he experienced his first ETT. But so even that young.
You had seen Vasquez present a couple times and kind of been like just blown it off as this is a wild thing, which is just, I want to introduce that to, since now you're a trainer of ETT that's kind of doing the top level stuff.
Well, and I want to say this, even now. So, I did get trained in all the classes, and ETT was so effective, I could replicate it. I did my ETT level 1 training Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I started using it Monday. I turned right around and started using it right away. And I've now done over 3,100 ETT sessions now. I keep a track of them, and they work. Like, this works. So I went through the classes again to become a trainer. Now I've been going around the country and training therapists all across the country. I'd love to, before the end of my career, have ETP therapists in all 50 states. And even when I'm demoing, Joel, when I'm teaching a class with Dr. Vasquez, sometimes he'll let me co-teach with him. The transformation happens so quickly. Even now, I'm blown away, and I have disbelief. Like, I just can't believe work so fast. I just was in Portland. I just trained some therapists in Portland, and there was a counselor who was in the training, and she let me demo the light device. Her topic was we do sentence starters sometimes. So the sentence starter was when I think about the dark. Now she said her whole life she had been afraid of the dark. And so here she was in her 30s, still afraid of the dark. And it was impacting her functioning. And so that was her sentence starter. When I think about being afraid of the dark, or when I think about the dark, and fear came up, and she experienced distress in her body. It was like a bell curve. And as we used the light device, this happened very quickly. Her brain remembered when she was 4 and she experienced an earthquake, and she was with her family in an apartment building, and it was the middle of the night, and everything shook and the TV fell off the wall. And her mom grabbed her hand, and she and her siblings and her parents ran out of the apartment building. Right? The ground was shaking. She was 4. She realized, right, her brain connected this memory. Her fear of the dark started with that memory. She had no conscious connection to when it began. But in that instant, as I showed her shades of dark red, that far red for shock and loss, and moved to yellow to help with the fear and overwhelm, her fear went away. And here she is in a training. She's a therapist, and she said, I'm not afraid anymore. And so we even thought about the last time she had been afraid of the dark, like kind of checking it out. We did a future when you think about being in the dark tonight. Her fear was gone. And she said she felt joy. And she said, I can't believe I'm even saying this. I feel joy. I'm kind of excited it's going to get dark tonight. And it was just so mind-blowing. And the whole class, all of those therapists were like, oh, wow, this is just great. Sometimes it happens that quickly.
Well, and so I was doing EMDR, and that led me to brain spotting. And before I was doing EMDR, I was doing kind of like somatic and parts-based therapies and sort of like some hypnosis techniques, but mostly just I wasn't trained in somatic experiencing or anything, but just those kind of parts-based somatic styles. And so I was always like looking not at what somebody's saying, but what they're feeling, and not what they think caused the event, but like all these emotions associated with the event. Because a lot of times that it gets you either deeper into it or to another thing. I was always trying to look at like what are the deep kind of subcortical brain's motivations here that we're not always quite aware of. And I don't think that you can analyze that or interpret it. At least maybe I'm just missing a gene or not bright enough to be able to tell you exactly, what happened in childhood. I think you just have to make room for it until it kind of naturally comes up, and that people will make those connections given kind of the space and the redirection back to what they seem to be running from or towards. And so when I said on our podcast all the time, because I mean, remember we were the first people in Alabama that I was able to find that were doing brain spotting. There was like one person I tried to get the brain spotting with her, and she was like, oh, I got that training, I put it on Psychology Today, but I don't like it, I don't do it. And another person, anyway, there just wasn't anyone around. Everybody acted like it was voodoo, even the MDR people, which research, the clinical researchers don't always love EMDR because it doesn't work for it's not as generalizable as some things, even though it does work for what it works for. And I kept saying on the podcast, like, if you are a trauma patient where you're a therapist and you're desperate to help people and you've done lots of things and you can compare these and there's a new thing out there, send it to me. Don't tell me, well, my PhD advisor told me DBT works for everything, so you should get DBT trained. Don't send me that email. But if you can say, well, I think lifespan integration plays with the precuneus and like our relationship to the salience of time around events, but I think EMDR does acute, if you can kind of Venn diagram these and you found a new thing, tell me, please tell me. And so I kept hearing about ETT from people, and I would look it up, and the website doesn't have a ton of details. And it's like, what is this? Like, is it a talk therapy? Like, I don't. And then, I talked to some providers that were kind of almost like reticent to talk about the techniques. And there was like, well, you look at this board and there's color on it. I'm like, And the people seemed incredibly smart. They seemed passionate about what they did. Like I was kind of doing everything I know to do to kind of bullshit detect, people that are looking for false positives and confirmation bias, or they're just kind of like doing a purple hat therapy. I mean, I'm pretty credulous. Yeah, and they seemed like, I mean, I couldn't kind of find any place where they seemed off. So I went, and Vasquez is going on about light and color, and I'm just sitting there in Austin being like, why did I pay all this money? Why am I here? And the same thing that you described, like somebody was going up, and I was like, I volunteer for this because I don't believe whatever. And I'm like sitting in front of the board, and the color yellow just would go black before my eyes, and I couldn't. I was like, is this laser cut, or what's like? And I would touch it, and Vasquez was like, please, I ask you not to touch the board. They're $500, and I couldn't understand why the color was going away. It just the same thing that so many people have had, where it's like, we can't believe it's going to happen until it happens. And even after the training, I mean, the training was pretty impactful and interesting. But you buy all these things, and I'm back in my office, and I'm kind of trying to play with them. But I'm looking at, the ETT1 manual that has like, this is what is going on when there's a primitive parasympathetic response on the color. This is what's going on when there's a parasympathetic response. This is when there's a sympathetic. This is when there is no issue with the color at all. And I have these charts for every single color, and I'm just pointing because I use the brain spotting pointer to point on the board, which works better for me because then I know exactly where they're looking, even if they don't see the color the same way I see it. So I just tap where I want them to look. And I'm looking at these charts that the patients obviously don't have the training in, and they're telling me the exact same thing, and it's changing from this one to this one to this one to this one. And after 2 weeks, it was like, okay, well, I can't talk myself out of this because I'm sitting here with information that you don't have, and I'm independently reproducing it, and I can't, and it doesn't stop happening. But even back in Alabama, it was probably 3-4 weeks before I finally was just like, okay, this neurologically is reproducible, because I'm trying everything that I can to try and suggest something else to try and get it to not work like it's supposed to, because I'm doubtful. I don't like authority. I don't like, when somebody says these are the rules, I'm like, well, do they have to be, and I couldn't make it not work. Which was pretty wild.
Joel, I think it was level 2 when you came in and you'd been sick. And
yeah, even then I had some doubts
with you.
Well, yeah, because I had a horrible ear infection, and my eardrum had ruptured. And so when y'all were like, oh, get the glasses, we'll do the goggles for him. It works for chronic pain. I was like, guys, there's blood dripping out of my ear this morning. Like, I didn't mom issues my way into and yet when the light position is here, my ear is a 5-alarm fire, and when the light position is here,
it's in your eyes at a different angle.
And I was like, no, ears are weird. Some juice probably moved around, and then you're clicking the thing, and it's like every single time 3 o'clock was a 5-alarm fire, 6 o'clock felt nothing.
We changed the direction of which light entered your eyes, and you felt differently depending on what angle the light came in your eyes. I remember working with you, and it was really exciting because I knew you are a scientist in many ways. You are skeptical. You want data. You want to understand. And so I thought, if Joel can experience the goggles, it's a felt experience, right? And I knew, I just had that confidence, this will work. And so I remember being really excited with you when the symptoms decreased and some of them went away, and you were able to sit through the weekend. I remember we kept checking in with you, like, how do you feel, Joel?
It did work. I've had those my whole life. They're pretty rough. And I wasn't able to get to a doctor or anything because I had paid for the training. I couldn't miss it. They're all day. Well, so can you say a little bit for people that are like, okay, there's a light, color, miracle box, device, goggles, whatever that heal people. How do I plug that into my clinical practice? This doesn't sound like me because I'm just a normal talk therapist. I mean, you were kind of coming from a cognitive and Rogerian world, and then you had real specific trainings around, the sex and different things. But just the kind of nuts and bolts of somebody comes in and they've got the same issue and you're talking about it. I know you've even got some marriage counseling demos that you did on the light device, which are kind of interesting. I don't do marriage counseling. But could you just kind of walk through how MJ as a talk therapist who does talk therapy, and then now you've got these new toys. How do you kind of plug those into the things that other people listening to this may do?
I would say prior to ETT, my focus was CBT and definitely Rogerian. I remember, meet clients where they are, be with them. People 101, people want to be heard and understood. And the way to heal is through relationship and not being alone. So that was how I approached my practice. And people would talk about whatever was bringing them into the therapy room, whether it was an adjustment from one phase to another, grief, trauma, a psychological condition. Talking just wasn't enough. When I learned how to do ETT, now there's a trifecta. My brain thinks, you client, me therapist, ETT. Now this is science, right? I can use the ETT, I can use the light and color to make the therapy more effective. And so transitioning from being just a talk therapist to now an ETT therapist was easier than I thought it was going to be. People would say, this is very weird. You want me to look at colors and talk about my feelings? I think that's really super strange, but I trust you, MJ, and I'm willing to try it. And once people experience that transition, the transformation in how they feel, they are drinking the Kool-Aid and it's easy. And my practice has been full for 9 years. I don't have a wait list because I'm full all the time and I don't want to make people wait, but I will refer them. I need to keep training ATT therapists so I have more and more people to refer to. And so when somebody comes in, Joel, and they say, I'll say, let's do a check-in. How are you feeling emotionally? How's your body feeling? What would you like to talk about today? And as they start talking, I will often say, is this something you would like to ETT to streamline our 50 minutes together? Instead of you talking about this and then we ETT it, would you like to talk about it while we use the colors to help you feel better as we go? And once people have experienced ETT, yes, I have one lady who she actually yelled at me, Joel. She said, never let me come here and not do ETT again. She said, I talked about all the things. Time was up. I felt terrible because I had all this emotion and then I had to leave. And she said, I know I'll feel better after I do ETT. So sometimes for new clients, there is a helping them understand we're going to do a scientific process. We're going to integrate light and color into what we're already doing to help you feel better before you leave. And now people consistently, Joel, they leave my office feeling better than when they got there. Mm-hmm. If they didn't, I would not be a therapist, or I wouldn't be a trauma therapist. And I certainly wouldn't go around training therapists around the country if I didn't believe and know this science was replicable. Mm-hmm. I see new therapists they're scared, they're green, they feel like they don't know what they're doing. And I encourage them. This is science, right? You therapist or me therapist, you client, ETT. If we can integrate this and we do 3 things, another trifecta, have the client talk about their issue. They have to be connected to their emotions. So we're going to correct dissociation while showing them wavelengths of light that match their emotional content. What they feel changes. It's science. It is replicable. Even the newest therapists can do this.
Well, and in my mind, like when you're looking, because we're integrative, we wanted to get, the cognitive therapy model of you go do CBT for 6 sessions, and if you don't have substantial improvement, then you need to take pills. I saw that kind of waning, and there was a new trauma movement, and we wanted to have somatic experiencing, we wanted to have lifespan integration, we wanted to have brain spotting, we wanted to have The QEEG brain mapping. We wanted to have micronutrition. We wanted to have polyvagal stimulators. All the things that 6 years ago. Now some of that's commercialized, but research was sort of indicating that it was moving that way. That stuff is always going to be more speculative because you can't randomize controlled trial something that's very subjective or doesn't exist. And then you need a couple years to do that. But that's what I was seeing, and brain spotting was kind of the first thing. I think the best models of therapy kind of do three things. And the first one is there's something that's immediately replicable. There's not 17 sessions of buy-in about like, oh, you don't believe it, but I promise if you do the work, this is going to happen. You can give somebody something in the room that day, because you're sort of setting, even if the model's not terrible, the provider's not exploitive, you're kind of, I just think 20 sessions in, you just got to have faith in me, but I'm not going to give you anything yet. You're sort of setting up something that is not a great, power dynamic relationship. And ETT definitely does the first one. I mean, the second thing is the models I think that are really good are kind of a universal language about emotion and how to engage with it. And so they integrate with any model, like there's something so somebody can come in to ETT as a cognitive behavioral therapist, as a DBT therapist, as a
experiencing therapist.
Yeah, exactly. And
best therapist.
And you're talking about the same emotion, but just while you're talking about it, you say, okay, fine. You're saying you're not scared. I kind of see scared, whatever. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's get on the board, which leads me to the third thing is that they're sort of empowering both to the patient and the provider. It's not like, oh, the provider has all this training and is on this tower and is telling you how to do it and you have to look at the right thing. The better models, I think, engage intuitively the provider and the patient in a way that you can still indicate with research, but it doesn't start with a number, And with the board, even people like I was doing brain spotting before I felt comfortable treating with the board, but I would assess on the board, and people would go there and they'd see all of these distortions in the colors, and then they'd do brain spotting and they'd come back and be like, oh, I can see green now. I can see green now. I'm like, yeah, that's great. It went crazy. That was going black for you for 2 weeks, and now it's there. But we got to work on red. Red is having a problem. So it's like all of those things that I really look for in a modality. That it's universal enough. You don't have to learn all this weird language. You don't have to completely break your paradigm and then convert from one religion to the next one. That this is really just a faster way of doing what you were doing anyway. They're all present there for me.
I have some therapist friends who are really experts in their field. One gentleman, Wayne Baker, he is an IFS therapist, and he's so good. He just loves IFS, and he also goes around with some trainers and trains other therapists in IFS. He is also an ETT therapist, and these modalities just blend so well together.
Yeah. The parts-based language is even a part of the brain spotting training now. They've gone ahead and made it part of it, because you will dig these parts up with any of these things that are activating the subcortical brain, that are brain-based, that just kind of skip all of the why I think that I'm here and go to why I'm actually here. You need to have parts-based language and somatic, some understanding of somatics.
Well, it's interesting with ETT. We ask the person, we have them talk about a topic, right? And they tell us what they think. They access and kick up their emotions. And then we say, what do you notice you feel in your body? And that way, as we are changing the angle at which the color and light come into their eyes, we can see at which angle do they have different sensations in their body? Where does it feel better, so that we can help them memorize the light that comes in at this angle, transpose to other angles to reduce any kind of emotional or physical distress. And so that blends in really, this brain-based intervention, right? Blends in really well with people who think in parts and who do somatic experiencing in those body-based kinds of therapy modalities.
Yeah, and I think another part of those, what the best modalities do is like this one, I think grows up with the provider. Like if you know nothing and have just taken your first class, or you've done it for 20 years, it does scale. Because it's like when I started, I was doing really good work and it was working, But I remember, Vasquez coming in the second day and being like, okay, so everyone should have their colors memorized and every part of the brain they active in. And everyone's kind of like, and then you went around and were like, no one has that done yet. No one ever does that. He always says that, and then, because it's such a new thing and it's so technical. And then all of a sudden it becomes intuitive. It goes from being this scary detail oriented thing to this like, oh, I just get this. And I mean, it was like, I sort of understood, okay, orange is sort of ego and green is like anger, but it's also black hole sucking. It's going to show up in attachment disorders or it's going to be burning in the chest, but it's kind of action. And sometimes that shows up as anger, but I didn't have a great understanding until I'd done the board, for about a year. And then it just became this natural thing of like, oh, orange is just self and how comfortable we are with this sort of center of identity. And so when orange is bleeding into red, that means that somebody mistook my emotional needs, or I mistook somebody else's emotional needs for conditions for my own survival, rightly or wrongly. And yellow is trapped, controlled, paranoid, boxed in, constraints, and green is kind of action and expansiveness, maybe anger. So yellow green is like in between those, like just confused and like I feel like something's hurting me, but I don't know what it is, or I need to act, but I don't even know what action I want to do. It's that space between anger and action and being boxed, and then all of a sudden I was talking about this to patients, but it just, you kind of have to start to feel how these things work and you have to get comfortable with like, okay, green's in the chest, but when that pops, maybe it's going to hop up into blue or blue green. And now the person needs to say something. They need to verbalize something that they haven't done, or maybe they're going to internalize it and it's going to hop down into yellow and it's going to be in their gut, and you just get used to these patterns, but you don't have to be the master that you're effective as an ETP provider after the first training, but then you could take 100 more classes and you're still going to be, getting familiarity with it. And I think some of the better models are able to do that. I hope that makes sense.
Well, as you were saying that, I was thinking you're validating the therapist in the room, right? All therapy, I think, is intuitive, right? We are in the room and we trust our gut instinct, right? And we listen to ourselves, our mirror neurons, right? We feel what the client feels. One of the things I love about ETT is that now it's the therapist, even in the virtual room, right? ETT can be done virtually.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a remote light device. So there's a way for clients to log into a website. The counselor, the ETT therapist logs into the website. We have a login code. Each therapist has their own. And so now we can do the light device with people over the internet. They can use their phone, their iPad, their computer. But here's the thing. We can, because it's science, you know this, Joel. Trifecta. Verbalization, emoting, visual eye stimulation. So I can talk to somebody on the phone and I can have them use a color app and I can direct them which colors to look at while they are talking to me about the topic. I remember the very first time I ETT'd myself. This story, it still blows my mind. I did the ETT level 1 training, and that's where we learned how to use the spectral chart and the multidimensional eye movement, which are the sticks, the ones with the color at the end. And brand new therapist, I don't really know what I'm doing. I started on Monday. It was working with my clients, even though I wasn't really sure what I was doing because I had just gotten trained. And so not long after that, I flew to Florida. And as I was on my way home on the flight, I was on the Southwest flight. The seats are a shade of indigo. That matters, but it didn't register to me at first. So I had some kind of a sinus infection and my ears hurt. So as we took off out of Fort Lauderdale, and just the pressure in my head hurt so much. And as we were flying, I could just feel it. And I was starting to panic because I knew as we were coming into Austin, it was really going to hurt on the way down. And I was getting distressed and it hurt so much. And I had been looking at the back of the seat in front of me, thinking about what I was feeling in my body and noticing how upset I was. And my eyes drifted to the seat diagonally from me. the back of the seat diagonally from me, and I just just kind of mindlessly looked that way, and then I heard, could hear myself saying, "Oh my gosh, my ears are bothering me," and then I had an awareness of, yeah, I do feel something, but I don't feel as worried and anxious over here. And all of a sudden, I realized I was looking at the color indigo. And when I had looked at it, when it was coming in my eyes straight ahead, I felt 1 degree of distress. When I looked to the right at indigo, and also the indigo from the seat in front of me is now coming in my eyes at an angle, I realized it felt better over there. And I realized I was ETTing myself. So I looked at the seat, the back of the seat to the left side of me. And what do I feel? How do I feel emotionally about what I feel? And then I memorized what I was seeing on the side that felt better. I looked to the other side. I tried to imagine I was seeing that same shade of indigo. My distress lightened. And when we landed, my head did not hurt. My sinuses had cleared up some. I didn't have the same emotional distress. And now I was actually elated because I'd ETT'd myself on an airplane after just one training, not really even understanding the science at all, not really knowing what I was doing, but it worked. That was that was gas in the tank for me to go get more training.
Mm. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. This is a great introduction to ETT for anyone unfamiliar. Hopefully, Vasquez can get more into the weeds with us about his theories and how he developed it and everything. Is there anything that you want to say or anything you want to include? And we'll definitely link to your practice website and the ETT
talk about
website.
Joel, I want to make sure that we name where therapists can go if they want to get trained in ETT. There's a website. It's www.etttraining.com. And that website, it has articles about what ETT is. It talks about the science of how ETT works. It has a list of, there's a therapist directory. So there's a place you can go to find ETT therapists around the world. An ETT therapist in France and in Portugal, and we have somebody who's going over to train in Israel. Like we are expanding. Dr. Vasquez has trained therapists, I think he said 20 countries around the world.
You got any in Norway? A couple of people from Norway have emailed me, and I hadn't been able to find anyone in their part of in the country. I don't know if there's any more.
No, but I would love to go there and train some people. So they can go and sign up for classes. So if therapists are interested in learning this training, experiencing level 1, they can go find where the next level 1 class will be held, and it goes up through level 7. So it's the first 2 training classes are about how to use the 4 pieces of equipment, the chart and the MDM wands and the goggles and the light device. But then level 3 teaches protocols, how to use ETT for trauma, depression, ADHD and ADD, OCD, right? It teaches how to correct dissociation. And then we have level 4 that talks about how to use ETT for physical conditions to reduce pain and change the stress and distress component tied to physical conditions. Level 5 talks about using ETT for spiritual issues. 6 and 7 are how to use ETT for addictions, which is very effective, and how to use this with couples. So they can learn all about what the classes are and sign up.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much for your time. And we will definitely, I know I have one question. Do you know of anyone that can do the remote ETT work who is not behind a board that will not let them practice out like internationally? Like, because a lot of the social workers, even if they have board reciprocity, and the LPCs, even if they have board reciprocity and can see somebody from California and Alabama or whatever, which I can't, my board doesn't do that. Like, I've had emails from Thailand, I've had emails from Iran, I've had emails from Norway, lots of places. And if there's a provider that's like a life coach or a chiropractor or a board that doesn't stop them from doing international practice, do you know of anybody in the community that could do that?
So this is a very legitimate question. If we have a therapist who is, counselors are limited by their state's rules, right? That we can only practice within the state that we are licensed in. Now, life coaches have the ability to practice across state lines. So this is still a really gray area because we have to abide by our board rules so that we don't lose our license. Life coaches in and of themselves cannot become trained in ETT. As of right now, it's restricted to somebody who has a mental health license. So
Okay.
LPCs and LMFTs and LCSW, PhD, like PsyDs, right? So we can get trained in this. Life coaches cannot.
Okay.
And I do know that, it is effective remotely. So we need to work on that to make sure that we can provide it all over the world.
Yeah. Well, we'll link to your website. We'll link to the ETT website where you can find information about trainings and all of that. And then is there anything else you want to add? We really appreciate you joining us to help share it. Because I think that once, I know some people that got trained in EMDR and were like, well, that's not for me, or got trained in hypnosis or got trained in DBT and are just kind of like, I wish I had done that because I've never used that. I've not ever really met anybody who got an ETT provider training and then said, I don't like that. And I've also never met anybody, and I mean, a lot of those people email me if I talk about any of this stuff. So if you have to get an email with somebody that said I did an ETT training and I don't use it, I don't like it.
One of my most profound moments. There's a lady who is very high up in the EMDR community who is local to Austin. She's been an EMDR practitioner since it began in the late 80s. She teaches EMDR and she came to the ETT training. I was in her level 1 class. I was co-teaching with Dr. Vasquez. And she was on the spectral chart and she decided that she wanted to ETT. When I think about not knowing about ETT before now, she was moving through her grief because she devoted so many years to EMDR and then discovered this late in her practice that ETT was so effective. And she did move through her grief very quickly and came to a place of recognizing these skills integrate. It is good that she has skills from EMDR. She can use some of those skills in how she now does ETT with her clients. And she told me she doesn't actually use EMDR anymore. Yeah. She is now an ETT therapist, which doesn't that speak to?
Well, there's still plenty of back and forth eye movements and ETT and different.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. This was so kind of you to join us. And we will link to everything, MJ, in the show notes. So please click those links and check out her other stuff.
Get some colors on.